All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here. And I hope it's more convenient for you all to be remote. It's easier for me to be here this way. So I'm glad we could all make it work out. And we're going to call the meeting to order at 6 p.m. So we have Vicky here as our minute taker. Is there somebody willing to be our timekeeper? Erin is not here today. And if you're raising your hand, I can't see you. So any takers?
Steve raises his hand.
Okay, great. All right. Thanks so much, Steve. Okay, so we will start with public comment. And I don't know if we have anyone here. Actually, I am looking to see. I can see participants, I think. Anybody have any public comment this evening? Okay, hearing none, then we will move on. One moment. Okay, and our next item is to approve the agenda. And I have one change that I'd like to make, which is to add under board management and government, a new item G, and everything after that will change letters, but it's a discussion item, and it is to discuss central office options. Are there anything else folks have on the agenda? And if not, can I have a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve the amended agenda.
Okay, Steve Rooney is making the motion to approve. And can I have a second?
Second,
Kristen Toy.
Oh, Kristen Toy. All those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye or put your thumb up.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so the agenda is passed. The first item on our agenda is to go into executive session under Title I VSA 313A7, academic records or suspension or discipline of students. May I have a motion for this executive session?
Barb,
so moved.
Okay, how about Barb Crandall can be the motion maker and Kathy Apgar can be the seconder? All those in favor of going into executive session, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so Patrick is set up a breakout room, and so board members plus Patrick and anyone else, Patrick, from the administration or the public joining us? Okay, so board members plus Patrick will move into that breakout room, and hopefully this should not take very long, and when we are done, we'll come back out to the main room. So Patrick, you're going to send everybody over? Great. Phew. That was a vortex. I'm so glad I'm back. Sorry about that. They really need to work on their iPhone module for Zoom. Anyway, so we are out, Vicky, at 6:36, and we now need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So move, Steve.
Okay, Steve Rooney made the motion, and a second.
I'll second, Sarah.
And Sarah LaPerle seconded. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
opposed.
Kathy?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Okay, the consent agenda is passed. All right, moving down to executive limitations monitoring. We have an action to approve the monitoring report for 2.3 financial conditions and activities. So I have one worksheet that I've gotten. So I'll take a motion from somebody and then we can ask questions if we have them. So I need a motion.
I'll move it. Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin. And a second.
I'll second.
Mike Dash second. Okay. Any questions or things you want to talk about with respect to this monitoring worksheet or this report?
I'll start with just a technical question because I realized that maybe I didn't do my homework correctly. Is it an expectation that we fill out that worksheet and send it to you as part of our role, or is that?
That would be great. In practice, it doesn't happen often, but you also have a chance to talk about anything you want to talk about now, and will make note of that when when I send in the final report about this report, so that it's captured, so that when we look at it next year, we can reflect back on what happened.
Perfect. That's very helpful.
Okay, so I don't see any questions or comments, so we just need to go through our approval process. So based upon the information provided, does the board find that this interpretation is reasonable? That the superintendent's interpretation is reasonable, yes or no? Thumbs up, please. And based upon the information provided, does the board find that the data demonstrates accomplishment of this interpretation? Okay. I think I'm looking at the wrong worksheet. Patrick, are those the only two questions? And then there's a third one. I'm looking at the signature page for A47, and it's just those two questions. So then do we just move to approve it?
I think that sounds right. Yes.
Okay. All right. So all those in favor of approving the superintendent's monitoring report for A47, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstain.
Just a point of, we're doing 2.3, aren't we? It's not 4.7.
Oh,
Yeah, it's 2.3.
2.3, you are right. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. We're doing 4.7 later, and that's why my questions were wrong. Okay. Hang on one second. I had a hard time finding that signature page on the drive. So if folks don't mind, I'm going to see if I can find that. Okay, here's A2.3. Aha. Okay, questions are the same. So I'm assuming the answers haven't changed. So all those in favor of approving the superintendent's monitoring report 2.3 financial conditions and activities, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, Kathy Apgar is abstaining. All right, thanks folks. Next we have an update financial report provided by Floyd. Any questions or comments for Floyd on that report?
Floyd, it looks like you might have a final tally on the lobby overrun at this point.
We're definitely coming in on that. We're 664 over as of the end of May. I ran one today and we've added substantially to it. We're at 950. Some of that will ease back with items that that will become accounts receivable. We have some insurance payments that are coming in on the gym floor, for example, that we've paid and haven't booked as a receivable yet. because we're not at the end of the year. But we're looking at somewhere around just under 900,000 that will come out of the capital reserve to bring us to balance at the end of the year. Which isn't great, but 1.8 million over on that line coming in at 900 is shows that the rest of the budget was well managed, I think, pretty well.
Right. Yeah.
Kevin?
What was the vote for using reserve funds? Wasn't it like 1.7 or was it 1.8?
It was up to 1.7, so that we'll only pull out what we need, and there won't be any, we won't be generating a fund balance that we have to deal with in the future. So it was 1.7.
Any other questions or comments about the financial report? Okay, thanks, Floyd. Next update is the superintendent's report and the accompanying links. Anybody have any questions or comments for Patrick on that? Does not look like it. Thanks again for bringing those to us. Okay, moving down to board management and governance. We have an action on the tuition waiver request, and we need a motion on that.
A motion. Justin?
And can you say what your motion is, please, Justin?
Approve it? Is that what?
I
what
think
we're doing? Right?
we were going to reject the tuition waiver
Reject it?
request.
Oh, I thought we were jumping to the next. Okay, never mind. I'm still understanding the structure of the meeting.
No problem.
Just
That's
a point of order, we usually pose questions in the affirmative. And then in this case, we would either say yes or no. So I'll make a motion that we approve the waiver request.
So I think we've done this a couple of different ways. And sometimes we have it on there as an approval and at the outset. And then, but more recently, I think we've not put in an determination in advance that we have to vote down. So I don't know what folks think, but in terms of avoiding confusion, I'm wondering if we are okay with making the motion. I don't know. I would accept any guidance from anyone who really likes parliamentary process on how they think we should proceed.
How about just a motion to support the administration's recommendation on the waiver request?
Patrick is shaking his head.
It isn't documented anywhere what the superintendent's recommendation is.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, I think we simply be straightforward about it and say, that we're going to deny the waiver request.
And would you like to make that motion, Steve?
Sure.
Okay, so Steve Rooney's making a motion.
Point of order.
Yes.
Kevin's already made a motion. Kevin made a motion to approve the tuition waiver request.
Oh, okay.
Kevin,
Sorry, I
you can
thought that was
withdraw your
just
motion.
I thought that was
Oh,
a procedural question. Was that a motion, Kevin?
It was both, actually.
Okay.
So
All
I
right.
made the point of order that questions are typically framed in the
In the
affirmative, and then I made the motion.
But the motion was not seconded, correct?
I
Correct.
don't
Kevin.
believe anybody seconded it.
So you can withdraw your motion.
I will withdraw my motion then.
Thank you. And thanks, Kathy. Okay, Steve,
So I'll make a motion that we deny the waiver request.
and a second.
I'll
I'll
second.
second.
Sarah.
Okay, Sarah, I think I heard you first. So Sarah LaPerle is seconding. All those in favor of denying the tuition waiver request, please say
May I say
aye.
something?
Oh,
Oh, yes,
no,
Pot.
no, yeah, the public comment isn't allowed at the moment.
Oh,
No,
I'm sorry.
it's-
Is this a,
Like, point of order. When a motion has been made and seconded is then it goes back to the person who has actually made the motion to discuss it, and that's the point at which you open it up for question.
Right.
correct,
the
but,
person,
but
the
of
person who
the,
asked,
to the board,
the person
questions of
who
the
made it,
board.
yeah, the person who made the request for a question is not on the board
How would we know
So
that?
this,
because it came from Lynn Jerger.
I am on the board, or not on the board, but I'm here.
Right, you're public.
Yes,
You're a public, you're a member of the public, yes.
right. This
Right,
is
so we'll-
imperative for my grandson's well-being mentally.
right, Miss Durger, thanks so much for being with us. And so we had a public comment period at the beginning of the meeting, and then we're having another one at the end of the meeting, but right now we're taking a board vote. Were you
Okay.
here at the beginning of the meeting when we had public comment?
I don't think I caught the very beginning. You started a little before 6.
Okay, well, we're going to proceed with our vote and then we can come back to you at public comment toward the end of the meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the table. Is there any discussion? Okay. All those in favor of denying the tuition waiver request, please say aye.
Aye.
All right,
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm opposed.
I'm opposed.
2,
Opposed.
3, 4. Okay. Any abstentions? And 1 abstention. Okay, so the motion carries. And we will move on to our next action.
Can you state the yays and nays and
Sure,
abstentions?
sure. So I think I have this right, but please correct me if I'm wrong. So we have Brad, Justin, Steve, Kevin, Sarah. 5 no's. I'm sorry, 5 yeses. And then we have Kathy, Kristen, and Barb as no's, and Mike as our abstention. Do I have that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Okay, thanks everyone. All right, so we're moving on to an action item to adopt 1, 2, 3 policies, and these are mandatory policies that 2 of which we've just learned about from the VSBA, 1 which Steve, I believe, caught that we did not have that was required some time ago. So we're adding that as well. So we need a motion to approve policy F2, non-discriminatory mascots and school branding, F3, fire and emergency preparedness drills, and F4, access control and visitor management. And may I have a motion?
I almost
So
make a
moved.
motion.
Okay, Steve Rooney moved, and can I have a second?
I'll second, Kristen.
Kristen seconded. Does anyone have any questions or discussion?
Yeah, the only thing that I'll say about this is that the F2 and F3 policies are required to be adopted by August 1st by the state. Normally, we would put them out for your review ahead of time, or at least one reading before we would then adopt them. But state law does allow us to go straight to adoption, provided that we give the public 10 days worth of warning ahead of doing so, which we did. There was, I guess we could have probably waited, Patrick, theoretically, for the earlier I may get the numbers wrong here, for the F2 policy, but we've been in arrears on that one for a little while. So, and I'm not sure that it really would have generated much in the way of change if we wanted to put that out for an initial reading before adopting it. But I think there isn't necessarily a state stipulation, Patrick, on F2.
No, F3 and F4 are the new ones that had a really quick turnaround for adoption.
Right.
F2, yeah, could take longer, but didn't see a need to take longer in light of having to act on the other ones. And important to note, I think that these are essentially, with one minor exception in F4, these are verbatim the model policies from VSBA.
Right.
And the minor exception in F4 is around, there was some latitude for districts to have language about recognizing the need for doors to be unlocked on occasion, or you could choose to not have any language about doors being unlocked on occasion and have a strict doors are always locked aspect. So we leaned on the doors occasionally unlocked when we think about Fine Arts Festival, things like that. That would be rare exceptions. So.
Right. So if folks were, concerned about not having a first reading before adopting the F2 policy, theoretically, we could pull that. But it seemed like it made sense to put them all out for adoption on this go around.
Patrick, on F4, when we talk about having the doors unlocked for a festival, it does say increased supervision in that area. The school will provide increased supervision. What does that look like at Mount Aid? Does that mean you were asking staff to provide that supervision, or do we hire outside contractors?
I think it could be either way. I think the idea is if you have to have doors unlocked, then you're going to have folks in that vicinity to monitor who's coming in and who's leaving, just to acknowledge that there's an increased security risk because the door is unlocked, and we'll mitigate that by having additional personnel to monitor the situation. And that could be hired personnel, or it could be our own staff that we assign.
Yeah, the policy also requires the administration to come up with procedures. That places the onus on them to develop procedures around this, some of which I'm sure are already in place, but that's more work to be done if there's any details to be flushed out.
Any other questions?
I'll just add that this essentially puts into law what has been a practice we've been working toward for years and has been considered best practice for some time. So, and I will add also that probably the greater impact in this language is going to be around the visitor management. And we have some systems that we're piloting this year that I think will facilitate this. It's called the Raptor system. And if you've been to Mount Aid recently, you may have noticed you put your driver's license in a little scanner, and that both records that you're there to visit. It prints out a tag with your picture on it, and it does a background check, kind of all within about 15 seconds. But the practice of having everyone who goes into, say, Mount Aid go through that front office to check in is going to be a new practice for some, whether it's IT support or central office, folks that are doing business at the school. Everyone who's not in that building all day, every day needs to go through that door and check in. So they'll have that kind of implication.
Kathy, is that a new handout? Okay. Any other
No, I
questions?
didn't know that.
No worries.
I had one quick one about sort of how pedantic we need to be. It sounds like these are sort of put forth by the state in terms of model policies, but on F3, and I don't know how much we need to wordsmith or not, but I was a little unclear as I was following it, right? It defines these options-based response drills to be sort of specific to this active shooter and intruder. And then in the first sort of administrative responsibilities, it says the school site in the district conducts age-appropriate options-based response drills, including fire drills. And so it felt like somehow you were folding fire drills into a definition that it didn't actually fit. And I know what the intent is, but I don't know if that's what that says, right? Like, I don't know how it can include fire drills if that isn't part of the original definition. Maybe this isn't an issue because the intent is there, or maybe it's something that we do need to like change language on. And so that's the broader question, I guess.
Yeah, I think they might have been just simply trying to acknowledge that the title of this policy is fire and emergency preparedness drills, so that they were trying to lump them both together.
Yeah, perfect. And I think that it can cover both. I just like those option-based response drills can't necessarily include fire drills. Like it could be and fire drills. You're doing both, but they're not by definition above the same kind of response. So I don't on a personal level care, frankly, but if we need to care in terms of the clarity of what these policies are, then that might be a place of wordsmithing, either in the definition of what options-based response drill is. I'm taking it at face value for how it's written, but maybe it includes, we have options for fire drills as well. I don't know. Or if that's truly separable, we want to make sure that the administration's responsibility, superintendent's responsibility is to have those separately tested or implemented each year.
There's a layer of detail here that's not, I don't think, included in the policy. It's around, it might make a reference to what we have to report to the state of Vermont, to the agency, to the AOE, regarding these drills, the frequency, the date they happen, sometimes even how long like a fire drill took. So I think with that layer of detail, I think it's clear on the school's part what's expected by law in this policy. And I think we have been, actually, we're a little bit ahead of the curve on this, that we have been conducting options-based drills. We've been doing it that are in ways that are age appropriate already. And we've certainly been doing the fire drills and lockdowns and all those other drills that are really important to ensure the students know what to do in a crisis situation, and staff. So I feel like we have what we need. And over time, if we learn otherwise, then we can always come back and we'll have that experience to lean on to recommend some language to change.
It's fine by me. I just wanted to make sure we were not shirking our responsibility, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I think I understand what you're saying, Mike. The language there is a bit confusing. I think somebody was trying to lump it into the paragraph rather than thinking about it in a legal format. The issue here is when we start playing with these too much, then we end up having to keep them the next time they get revised. And it might make more sense to poke VSBA with a suggestion on that topic. So the next version of it that comes out might be a little clearer.
I do want to also just mention one other implication. When you dig in a little deeper to the statute, it specifically says from a visitor management and access control perspective that we have a way to sign people in before they gain access to the building. So what we just did with the renovation to Mount Abe achieves that. So now people go into the sort of vestibule, they have a transaction with someone in the office at the window, and assuming that all goes accordingly, they're then granted access to the building. Most other places, people enter the building to go to the front office to sign in, and they're already in the building. So we've already been in conversation for a little while about making some changes to enhance security. So like we're looking at a pretty significant rearrangement of space at the front office at Bristol Elementary School by way of example, where we can move an administrative assistant adjacent to that little vestibule space as you come in the front entrance at Bristol, so that there can be a similar transaction before the person is allowed to enter the building. And so we're working in that direction. It's going to cost some money. It's going to take some time, but I think we can achieve that ability to check people in prior to gaining access in each of our buildings over the next couple of years, which there's some latitude in the statute to allow for time to do that.
Any other questions or, oh, go ahead, Kathy.
Where's my hand on Patrick? I noted in F3 that parents will be notified not later than 1 day prior that you're having a drill. Is that currently the practice?
I think that practice is pretty mixed right now. There are different schools of thought around drills. Personally, when I was a building principal, I didn't like to announce drills because emergencies don't get announced. And I like to practice as close to the real event as we can to be as prepared as possible should something really happen. And people don't take it as seriously sometimes when it's announced ahead of time and they know it's a drill. And the other school of thought is, you know, to give people notice and whatnot. So our practice is mixed because of those different schools of thought. This makes it more clear what the expectation is that's either consistent with or not consistent with your current school of thought.
Is there a way that we could remove that piece? Because I'm also looking at those people who might choose to keep their kids at home because it's going to be a drill day. And those tend to be the kids that really need to be there the most. So can we remove item number 3 from administrative responsibilities on F3?
I would say not without further digging, because we'd have to look at the statute and make sure that the statute didn't make that a requirement that is then being written into policy. So yeah, we would need to do some more homework before we remove that. And in terms of, I don't know that people are apt to stay home because it's a drill day, because drills are typically not very long unless it happens to be a relocation practice where they're actually walking to a relocation site. That's probably twice a year. That's when that takes a little bit more time, but otherwise it's a 5 to 10 minute kind of a situation typically. So yeah, I'd be hesitant to remove that language from the model policy at this point.
So what does it look like? How do you notify these parents a day in advance? This is something you just send out on electronically and just say, hey, we're having a drill tomorrow?
Yep, we could use multiple methods. There are different listservs for emails. We could use our Blackboard Connect message to send a voice message or a text message. There could be messages that are sent home, and a lot of our elementary schools do these Friday folders. That's another mechanism to send information home. So, and we might use any combination of those to make everyone aware.
I would just say give yourself a break, and when you post the school calendar for the next year, plug them in.
Yeah, and frankly, the notifying folks about the options-based response drills, like the active shooter intruder kinds of things, we tend to notify ahead of time for those because they're a lot more sensitive, I think. At least at now, they're relatively new still. So we definitely recognize the sensitive nature of those and try to get out in front of that with families and with students fire drills, the things we've been doing for years and years that are more routine are the ones we've been less apt to notify ahead of time for, or at least where there's mixed practice. So that would be the only change there. And I'd have to dig a little deeper to see if fire as well as options based response drills have to be notified ahead of time. Not a huge deal if it is, but I'll have to dig a little deeper to see that clarity.
Okay. Any other questions about these, these three policies? All right, then, all those in favor of adopting F2, F3, and F4, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there a way we could separate it out and look at each one individually?
The motion
Well,
was
the
to adopt all
motion
three.
was all three of them, so
Okay.
you'd have to propose an amendment to pull one.
Okay, so all those in favor of adopting F2, F3, and F4, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Is it okay, Kathy? Sorry, I can't see everybody. All right, any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. So now we're down to what I was trying to get us to work
Kristen,
through earlier.
Kristen, I'm sorry, it's Vicky. Can I have a clarification because the
Yes.
motions have gotten, I'm not quite sure of your policy, and I just want to make sure I have this correct. I don't record abstentions, who abstained, because that's generally not practice in most places. But I'm not sure how if your practice of the board is to record names for objections. Because we really haven't, since I've been doing this, I don't think we've had any, honestly, I can recall.
I don't believe in our minutes, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, that we record a roll call of who approves or denies or abstains from a vote. But earlier Kevin asked for that.
Mhm.
So I think then that's captured in the minutes.
Okay, so in the consent agenda, there were 2 objections or 2 abstentions. I'm sorry, it was hard to hear.
Nope, in the consent agenda, there was just 1 objection and no abstentions.
Okay, so motion passed with 1 objection.
Correct.
And again, your policy is we're not naming people who
Correct.
object. Yeah, okay, good. I agree with that. And then same thing with the monitoring report. Was there 1 abstention?
Yes.
Okay. And then in the minutes, you want the ayes and nays recorded for the
And abstention.
and abstention for the tuition waiver.
Correct.
And that was 3 opposed, 1 abstention.
Um,
And I thought I had Apgar, Toy, and Crandall opposing.
and
Dash
Dash
abstaining.
Yep, correct.
Okay,
That's right.
okay, thanks very much, sorry.
Sure, that's okay. Okay, so now we're moving on to an action to approve the monitoring report 4.7 governance investment. Steve Rooney prepared this one, I believe. And we need a motion to approve this.
I'll make a motion to approve it. Sarah.
I'll second it. Kathy?
Sarah LaPearl made the motion and Kathy Apgar seconded. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
Nice work.
Well, thanks.
And very fast turnaround, Steve. You made Jennifer Bauer's day. All right. Doesn't sound like there are any other comments. So all those in favor of approving, oh, wait. Now I need to ask the questions. Yes. All right. Based upon the information provided, does the board find that this interpretation is reasonable? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Great. Okay, and based upon the information provided, does the board find that the data demonstrates accomplishment of this interpretation? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. So all those in favor of approving 4.7 governance and investment, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. All right, so we have a few discussion items here, which we'll try to move through in a reasonable amount of time. So the first is discussion around 2.1 treatment of current and prospective students and families. Patrick was looking at whether a transfer policy could be, intra-district transfer policy could be woven into that existing policy language, or whether we needed a procedure. And you should have received an attachment that is as a procedure. Patrick, do you want to add any other context to that?
Sure. So, gosh, a few weeks back now, several weeks maybe at this point, when Krista, Aaron, and I met to plan for this agenda, we were reflecting on the conversations to date around school choice and school transfer language. And the three of us thought that there was much more consensus building around the concept of intra-district transfer than there was around sort of full choice. And so we looked at ways to maybe advance that conversation around the transfer language, and kind of had some conversation around a new policy versus trying to embed that in current policy, just as a general practice. Typically, governance structures that utilize policy governance, essentially in a strict policy governance realm, you would have your ends policies and your executive limitations policies, which basically say to the CEO or superintendent, you need to achieve these ends, and you can achieve those ends in any way you see fit, so long as you don't violate these executive limitations. And then you have your two board sets of policies. So generally, that's the ideal policy governance situation. In the state of Vermont, we have required policies that we have to have that go beyond what policy governance has. And so our practice has been basically to have our policy governance policies and to have our required policies, and not too many beyond that, to the extent that we can sort of manage and control it. So the idea of adding a new policy that then isn't embedded in a policy monitoring process, et cetera, didn't seem ideal. And it seemed like there might be room within existing policy to have some language around transfer. 2.1 is the place where I thought it could fit best. I looked at it a lot of different ways to see if there was a way to make 2.1 sort of encompass this concept of intra-district transfer, and it just wasn't working for me. So an alternative that I went with, that I shared with you, is this idea of having an administrative policy, or a procedure, I should say, that essentially uses a combination of the language from Madison Northwest's policy and language from Madison Northwest's procedure that articulates the intent behind intra-district transfer and the procedures that we would follow when that comes up. So that's what I shared with you. If that works, I don't think there's any real action needed here, just sort of a sort of common agreement that that's the way we'd like to go, because the development of procedures falls to the superintendent. So if we want to go the procedure route, I'm sharing that's the procedure that I would go with, and I can move that forward. If the board feels more strongly that it needs to be policy, we either need to continue looking at something within policy governance that exists already, or write a new policy and kind of tag it on.
And I would just add that this is the one that ideally we'd figure out sooner rather than later, because it really helps us navigate and eliminate the tuition waiver request process. And also, I wonder, Patrick, can this updates on the procedure as it's going year to year be evidence that's provided as part of 2.1? Or does it not? You know, in this interest of the board's interest in getting updates on how this is going and having some accountability over it, how would that happen?
I think we could have data on the number of requests for transfers and how many were granted and how many were denied. Anything deeper than that from a, to be shared with the public, we start to get into, information that wouldn't be appropriate to share about family situations, but we could certainly share that high level data as evidence in a monitoring report to keep the board apprised.
Okay, so I lost track of the order of hands, so I'm just going to go as I see them. Steve.
So two things. One, Patrick, this looks like those sorts of requests would no longer be brought to the board. That you would basically be the end of that decision tree.
Yep.
And two, no, I remembered the first point. I'm losing the second point. Kathy, why don't you go ahead? Maybe I can remember the second thing I was going to mention.
Wait a minute, I forgot mine too, Steve. I had a couple of quick questions, Patrick. How did you arrive at the January 15th date? Is there some significance to that? Students whose residence change within the district boundaries after January 15th may continue at the school.
I think that puts us past the halfway point. That right around that early to mid-January is typically when we're into the second half of the school year. So it essentially would allow a student to finish out a year they've already spent half or better in. And that's consistent with the language that Addis Northwest used. And in talking with their superintendent, that language has served them well so far. So seemed as good as anything to use.
And the interdistrict transfers, you have 6 criteria here under which somebody can request an interdistrict transfer. Those are the only 6 that are accepted, or should it read may include, but is not limited to the following?
If you read some of the language for some of them, like one could argue item number 3 alone is kind of a catch-all. So as I read through these, again, these are consistent with Addis Northwest, who has said this has worked well for them. And when I read through these, I felt like I couldn't come up with a situation that a parent could make a request that wouldn't fit here. There's some discretion on the superintendent's part, like what constitutes a significant family and or student circumstance of educational, medical, financial, personal nature that would be relieved by this. I mean, that one could argue that alone is all that we would actually need to facilitate this.
And the last question I'll pester you with is there any way for a parent or guardian to appeal the superintendent's decision to the board?
Not with this procedure as it's written. It could certainly be written in. But the way this is written is that there's not an appeal process for this.
Thank you.
Sarah.
Sorry. I just want to clarify. So this is for somebody to stay at their own school that they've been at, not to move out. Transfer is actually staying put.
It could be either. So this pretty exclusively pertains to elementary school because we only have 1 middle high school. So this could be a student who resides in and currently attends Moncton School, for example, who, for whatever the extenuating circumstances are, want to continue to reside in Moncton but attend Beaman. This would allow for that to happen. It could also, as you described, if the student currently lives in Moncton and they move to a different town in our district, but they want to stay at Moncton, this allows for that as well.
Mike, and then Kevin.
Yeah, just a quick question again for Patrick. I think when we were having this discussion a little while back, there was some discussion about considerations for sort of class size and sort of overall makeup in making some of these determinations to make sure that there wasn't a mass exodus from a kindergarten in one school that would put the students that remained at a disadvantage or overburden another school where people were transferring to. But I don't see any of that language in this current procedure. Would you, as written, have that discretion to use that as a factor when evaluating this, or is that something that would be worthwhile to include sort of based on our discussions?
Yeah, I would see it as an unwritten understanding that that's one of the factors I'd be looking at as to whether or not we can accommodate the request. But again, we could certainly include some of those types of things. I think we want to be careful about an exhaustive list of the things that will be considered, because that can shift and there may be some things that we think of in certain situations. But to give some examples of the kinds of things that we'd consider, like class size, be certainly agreeable.
Yeah, I think as written, it seems very specific to the particular request. And it just might put you in a position where there might be uncertainty from parents who say, this looks like it's about my student, but you said no for something unrelated to my student. And that they might be in for a surprise if this is the procedure that they can look to.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, but this procedure is designed to navigate unforeseen circumstances that come up in the lives of kids and families. It's different from school choice, where a family is making a kind of a premeditated decision to choose a different school, not because of an unforeseen, necessarily because of an unforeseen circumstance. And I think school choice was where you might see more of that class size language. Am I right, Patrick?
Yeah, so the transfer necessitates that there are extenuating circumstances. Choice does not necessitate that there are extenuating circumstances. It may simply be a desire to be at a different school for whatever reason. I think in either case, I think in the choice policy, if that were to come to fruition, we want to make sure there's really clear language in there about the guardrails, one of which would be class size. In the transfer policy, we're not talking necessarily about students changing in mass, like we might be in, like the likelihood of there being dozens of students at any one point in time that have extenuating circumstances that warrant a transfer are far less than in a choice situation. And I think the language here essentially says it's superintendent's discretion given the extenuating circumstances. And with that discretion, part of what I would be looking at are what are the implications of this student coming from Moncton to Beaman in the example I gave before? Does that put Beaman's kindergarten over the number of students that we want to have in kindergarten? In which case, that may be a reason to say, I can't approve this transfer request. Or perhaps the extenuating circumstances are so significant that we're willing to make an exception and put, instead of 20 in kindergarten, we'll have 21, even though we said we didn't really want to have more than 20. So those are the kinds of things that leave it to my discretion in this procedure as it's written. So that's where for me it's sort of unwritten. And we could, for transparency's sake, say these are the kinds of things that we would take into consideration.
I see a dancing thumb from Mike, but I love how it now has like animation on the thumbs. And then Kathy, was that a new hand or an old hand?
Both of my hands are rolled, but no, that wasn't coming down. So thank you.
Okay, no problem. Am I missing any other?
I guess a question I have, Krista, is sort of higher level with this. There, knowing that there are details we could look at changing within the procedure as it's written. That sort of philosophy of policy versus procedure, I think, is be good to get some clarity from the board on what direction they're comfortable going.
Steve.
Yeah, so that kicked off my other thought, which was, you know, I could certainly see this being evidence in 2.1, you know, treatment of students, you know, as our way to monitor how that's going, without having to drag that into the policy.
Could let's just get some thumbs on whether folks are comfortable with this being a procedure versus a policy. And I guess the only other thing I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, it seems like it's a lot more expedient for us to make this a procedure. And there's I think, a advantage to expediency, because for a long time now, and for new board members, this might be new to you, but we've grappled, for those of us that have been on the board for a while, with the variability of tuition waiver requests, how to evaluate them, what our role was in this versus the superintendent's recommendation, and they keep coming. And so we've been really seeking some more clarity, and less so around school choice, but this gives us that in a procedure format, I think, is a way to enact it more quickly than policy. Would you agree with that, Steve, or anybody else?
Oh, Kevin's got his hand up. I think I can hear that.
Kevin,
first.
go ahead.
So I think I'm comfortable with this being a procedure as opposed to a policy, but somebody had, I think it was Kathy, said something about some level of recourse, and I don't know, there's pluses and minuses to that. Is one is if you don't like what the superintendent says, it's just another trail to the board, and maybe that's okay, and maybe we want the decision to stop right with the superintendent. But I guess once it becomes a procedure, all that kind of stuff just gets kind of buried unless we make a conscious decision as we look at it, and then make sure it's what we want.
Well, the only way to address that otherwise, I think, is to incorporate language into 2.1 in regards to monitoring. Just what would we want to see as evidence that this particular procedure is not, you know, generating undue angst in the community, or, you know, that we're not getting lots and lots of objections, because obviously people can object to the board whether or not they're, you know, given the right to do it or not in this procedure, and we can monitor how that's going. You know, or are we hearing a lot of negative comments from the community based upon the results of how this is going or not? That's one way to handle it anyway.
And I would add that our current tuition waiver request doesn't have any sort of appeal. Of course, we're involved in that. So I'm not sure where the appeal would go to, but there isn't, you know, that's sort of, the decision is the decision. So what do folks think about this being a procedure? And I guess I would just also say, I think we can get the temperature on that, sit on the language a little and get comfortable with it, and maybe review it again at our next meeting to decide if we're good with it as it is, or we have anything else.
And I'd be
Well, the
happy to
next-
receive any emails from folks with ideas on improvements to what has been shared.
Yeah, they would have to go directly to you, so they couldn't be shared with the rest of us.
Yep.
Go ahead, Kathy.
I just had a question. So what's the advantage of a procedure over having it as a policy? And a policy should have some kind of a way to appeal. What is that? Why are we looking at it as a procedure rather than a policy?
So I think that Patrick was trying to see if he could find a policy to embed it in that it made sense. 2.1 was the one that he was looking at, treatment of students and families, but it wasn't a natural fit. And so he's offering this as an alternative.
And it's always a, it's the policy governance ends versus means discussion. Are we trying to, our policy, what we write as policy, it limits what Patrick can do if we write it as policy. And we then have to be responsible for all of the detail and how how it's executed and everything. We're basically determining the means to how this is done, versus us versus a procedure which Patrick is the author of and the maintainer of, and can adjust without coming back to us about every little nuance of it that needs to be tweaked over time. And our policy is treat students and parents well, and our ability to monitor that could be there could be evidence given for what's happening here that we haven't received any bad comments or grievances, or nobody's taken us to court over how this is being run by the administration, and which is just the way we handle other things in similar fashion.
Yeah, to add to that, we have in another policy, I can't remember which one, but related to finance and or capital investments, we have links to different procedures that outline how things are going to happen. And so Patrick will report on that as evidence, or he'll share a link to the handbook, so we can monitor how this is going within a policy. That's probably an easier way to navigate it than trying to create a new policy.
Right. It would be like us trying to write the student handbook ourselves versus saying to Patrick, treat your students and be clear about it. And Patrick pointing to evidence saying, here's the student handbook that we produce as evidence that he's doing that.
It seems to me, Krista, that to Steve's previous point, if the procedure is not being is seen as being unfair or to the detriment of a family, we're going to hear about it. So
yeah.
I would think that at least for now a procedure would be the way to go. And if that creates problems down the road, it's something we can look at again.
It begs the question on the larger discussion, which we haven't had yet, about the choice issue and how we want to execute that half of it. This is potentially the easier half of the discussion to have, because
right.
We obviously want to try to deal with extenuating circumstances where we can, but when it's simply a option that the parents would like to exercise, it becomes more difficult to put guardrails around it. And whether the school board wants to be the writers of all of that policy, which Addison Northwest is written, they have a policy that, and I don't know, is that a procedure, or that's or is that a policy, Patrick?
So they have a transfer policy and they have a procedure to accompany that transfer policy.
But they're not a policy governance board. Yeah, so they have lots and lots of policies. The tricky part is just the monitoring. And so embedding it within an existing policy actually gives it more, I think, accountability in a way to have it be linked as evidence to an existing policy, because we have a pretty good record of monitoring those. I guess what I'd like to do is get a sense if folks are okay with how people feel about this as a procedure, and then suggest that people share comments directly to Patrick about any feedback they have on it. And we can revisit it at our next meeting to finalize it. Or I guess we're not really finalizing it, are we, Patrick? We would just be saying, hey, here's some more things, please consider. And
But I could certainly share
carry
an
on.
updated draft after receiving feedback.
Okay. So can I see a thumbs if folks are okay with this being a procedure versus a policy? Okay. All right. So we'll please share with Patrick any thoughts you have, and then Patrick, at our next full board meeting in August, if you can give us an updated version, that would be great. All right. So I think it was Steve who said that was the easy one. And the next item up
Yeah.
is the more meaty one, the elementary school choice policy. And I'm wondering,
And we have
considering,
4 minutes, by the way.
yeah, right. So to that end, I'm wondering how we might work toward a decision on this, and if it makes sense to use our committee structure to ask the P&G committee to dive a little more deeply into what a sample policy or procedure might look like. And
Yeah, and we've already had some discussion on that.
amazing.
With Patrick and Katrina, and the thought process was that we might take the P&G committee might take a quick stab with the other examples that were out there and sort of put something together as a first draft for Patrick and Katrina then to noodle a little bit, and then we might come back to the full board with something.
Great. And where does that fit with the other things on your wish list to accomplish? Is that like at the top of your list right now, or?
Well, we can, it's up there. It's in the top three.
Okay.
I have to go back and look, I think, but because I know we were looking to try to resolve it.
Oh, don't
before we
worry.
had a whole-
Steve has a priority list, of course. It's up there. I agree with you, but I haven't looked at it in a little bit. We did bring it
Yeah.
up again with the administrative team just on Friday at our retreat, and we all recognize this is a priority for us to have conversations about. So if we want to play around with language over the summer and then bring something back for everybody to kind of, what was the term you used, noodle over? I think that would be really great for everybody to kind of, with fresh eyes, start thinking about, especially looking at some of the samples that were gathered. I think there's something there for us to focus on. Steve, I know you were going to take the lead on drafting something eventually.
Yeah.
Great. All right. If the full board is comfortable with that being the next step on this, which I see some heads nodding, then I think we can move that there and see our new committee structure at work. Okay. And then I can't remember, was parking lot items before? Yes. Okay. So the next thing is parking lot items. And so on this theme of committees and full board work, these are the list of topics that have percolated up over the past year, and it's our practice to regularly review them and figure out where we're at. Are they still things we want to explore? And if so, how? And so I'm wondering what folks think could shift to committee work. What is something that we might want to look at together as a full board? And if that's the case, so we can incorporate it into our work plan. And then my third question is what's missing? So starting with, maybe I'll just go through each topic and folks can share thoughts on where they think those topics should land. So assessment 101, I think this relates to the ends report and board education around the ways that we assess student progress. Is that right, Patrick? Yeah. Okay, so that doesn't, I'm not sure if that could be fit into a committee. So I guess maybe if folks want to let me know if they think this is something that we're still interested in, if so, should incorporate into our board work plan.
We also looked at this during the retreat, right? Like the same kind of concept about what we're really looking for in the ends report, and then that is way too close to when the ends report needs to be completed by. So it's more of like, what would we want it to be like a year later? Not what do we want to see in October. So I think to me, that's a full board discussion that might be informed by some other things we're doing, but.
And Sarah, so that's helpful. And do you think that that's a conversation we would want to have at the retreat or earlier in the academic year?
Well, I think for us right now, we should probably have it at the retreat, because that seems to be when the conversation has fallen. And then, because it's not, we can hear this is what, was stated last year, and this is how we're preparing it for this year. What do we want to know? So we know in advance going in, so we don't spend our conversation complaining about what's not in it or what is in it when we get the end report, that we actually use it. We know what that is from the conversation in August. And I think especially for new board members, they should know what is going to be coming on that, and that should generate some good questions. I think that's full board at this point in time, but maybe it gets shifted at a later point.
Is it, Katrina and Patrick, do you think it's reasonable to provide a tutorial on what we're currently doing in the way of assessments and or like what we're moving toward at the retreat, which is, about a month and a half away? Or is that?
Yeah, that was
lift?
It is a big lift, and the folks that we would tag to help with that are less available in the summertime as they are during the school year. But I'll turn to Katrina to hear her thoughts as someone who'd be the sort of principal architect of whatever would come up for the retreat.
I would say that for the purposes of the retreat and for the purposes of what the board is looking for outcome data, I would really want to encourage you all to, and us as a team, to be thinking about what is your ultimate purpose? What is your goal? What is it you want to know? Start big, and then we can always layer back down, but we're not going to get to everything. I mean, I've been in education for 30 years. I'm still learning about educational assessment. It's changing all the time. I'm finding out that we're not going to have our statewide assessment data prepared for your ends monitoring report this fall. So I have to pivot and think about what else can I provide you based on your interpretation of the ends policy. So I guess that would be the place I would ask the board to start in August, is look at your interpretation of the ends policy, which was to help drive our work internally so that we weren't cherry picking different things. Like, do you want to know about how kids did in health class in 7th grade? Or do you want to know how kids are, reaching their, phonemic awareness assessments in first grade. There are so many data sets we could be providing you. But when we made that policy interpretation, it was in an attempt to keep it focused on ends. So how are we graduating our sixth graders? How are we graduating our 10th, 12th graders, as board members, as community members? Are we doing our job and bringing kids to the next level? I would encourage the board to keep that conversation at that level, because I can go pull data in 1,100 different ways. They're not going to be the state assessment scores necessarily going into this fall differently than in the past. And that might actually be okay. But you also need to decide what you want to know and what that's going to do for you. What is that going to tell you? Because it tells us as teachers and principals and, special educators, very different things than it's going to tell you as a board. So you have to think about your grain size. And so I guess my suggestion would be spend the time at the retreat thinking about grain size. What's going to actually inform you enough to actually help you understand where we're going as it relates to the ends. And again, we're still talking about, are the ends what we want them to be? And then I would argue, is the interpretation of the ends up for debate? Like maybe that's where we start having another conversation, because end of sixth grade, end of 12th grade, that might not be enough. Do you want to start seeing stuff at the end of second grade, at the end of fifth grade, at the end of 10th grade? Because if you start telling us to give you that information, that might start telling you a different story. But you have to work on your interpretations so that we have a roadmap that we're planning for on an annual basis. I hope that makes sense.
I think that's super helpful. Thank you. And I'm wondering, even in addition to that framing, just especially for new folks, what are we looking at right now? What do we currently look at, and why, and what are the pros and cons? But I think that's really helpful. I see some hands. I don't remember the order. So Kevin, and then Steve.
So I can't see myself, so I have to figure out if I'm talking or not. But
You're talking.
Assessment 101, it seems, and we're talking about retreat in August and stuff, and it seems so light as to what we really need to be doing. I'm thinking we need to really start looking at visionary educational trends and directions, if you will. And it's not a half a day retreat in August. That we need to reconnect with, and I'm sure there's many more things than that, but like the Nate Levins and visibility or mindset of where things are going and what needs to be done. Even though that didn't fare all that well. So I'm more interested in trying to understand and see the projection or see the options that we as a board can start looking at trends and directions and how they compared to what we have for an ends policy. I'm concerned when we talk about assessments that we look inward too much. It's almost a two-book system, I guess you could say. If you're a good mobster, you know all about what a two-book system is. But it's very important to see that internal information and evaluation and make it so that we're using that information to make sure we're carrying people's students along the best we can. But it's also equally important to see what, in absolute terms, what our student friends in the state and the country, for that matter, are doing and tacking against that. And it's a personal bird in my saddle. It's too often we make light of those state and national rankings and stuff, but those people have the same problems we do, and we just need to make sure that our internal assessments are driving the proper responses that we need for to be peers with state and national students as well. So I think there's a ton of work there. I don't have a clue as to anything, how to do anything other than what I said. And I think it's, you know, it's a great opportunity for the board to maybe take some time at the retreat and really start looking at the more visionary things and how we tie things back to the ends policy.
Thank you, Kevin. Steve, I think.
Yeah,
raised your hand up next.
so as timekeeper, we're 10 minutes over right now.
Okay.
And the P&G committee is thinking about this. We talked a little bit about what the same presentation looked like last year at the retreat. We had the same conversation. And we wanted to kind of maybe revisit what came out of that discussion at the retreat, if we could, for just a brief update for the new members. And then I know we've talked about in the past trying to develop some more granular, some more detail to the ends policy that might allow for the monitoring report to be a little more grounded in, and for us to, be able to see more progressive steps being taken rather than looking at it as a broad brush and then being and just reporting non-compliance every year, that we might have some ladder steps that we could see that might show positive progress to the point where we think things are trending in the right direction. That was kind of a topic that we were going to try to explore a bit in the P&G committee, but I think having a retreat discussion about it first would help direct that discussion further at the committee level.
Thanks, Steve.
So I just want to add one more thought that I think this discussion is not a committee discussion. As painful as it could be trying to herd 10 people or 13 or however many, I think it's so important that this is a board discussion, not a committee discussion.
Yeah, and that's not really what I was intending to say, that we would be driving the whole conversation, but there's a lot of work just to prep to get the discussion in front of the board. And I think that's something that we could help with.
There are some other items here. So I think we're talking about assessment overview, but we're also talking about the ends. But in addition to that, there's the timing of monitoring reports and direct monitoring as a concept. Are those things that could be within the P&G?
Yeah, I think they're already on our list.
Okay.
So.
And then we have update on Levinson's work, but we also have the Levinson budget model versus the current budget model. So the Levinson work, I wonder if that is part of our bigger picture, future direction conversation, Kevin. The budget model versus the current budget model seems like that could be finance committee. I don't know what folks think about that.
We had a conversation about that at our finance committee, and we are meeting with Lloyd about that prior to the retreat is our hope, just to see where it's going so we can help communicate where that is and all of that. So yes, take it off the big group list so we bring it to the big group.
Great. We also have a public comment, and this might be something that we first start out as a kind of overall board development. There are some great webinar recordings from VSBA, and when thinking about the retreat, and Patrick and Aaron and I were thinking about whether we would want to invite someone from the VSBA, but they have a lot of things we can just watch together as a group. And this is one that they talked about at the joint Superintendent Association and School Board Association annual meeting. But but it might be one that we put under the banner of board education. Just thinking about how public comment works before we determine whether we want to adjust our specific practice or protocol. Any initial reactions to that, or?
I think I'd prefer to have a homework assignment before the board meeting and then be able to discuss it.
So watch it in advance.
Yes.
Okay. That means you all have to do your homework. I'll make a note of that, and then maybe we can have like a pop quiz at the start to see who actually watched it. We can have like some Easter eggs that we can pull out of the video. Okay. All right. And then we have what we want to do with our updates that we're hoping to get around the strategic plan. And maybe that's something we work into our work plan. Okay. So I'm going to move on from parking lot items now. I think we've got a sense of where some of these are going to go, and I know we're running short on time. The other, let's see. So I do want us to have a quick conversation about central office. I believe it was the end of March that which feels like it was just yesterday, but is a while ago now, that Floyd walked us through some different options and what it sounded like. I looked back at the video and the minutes, and it sounded like we had some consensus around narrowing down the options to moving central office to the Gray House at Mount Abe, or on the Mount Abe campus, buying the current Munsell Ave location, and possibly looking at renovation in Robinson, at the Robinson Elementary School in Starksboro. It seems like it would be really helpful for us to move this conversation forward. It's been in limbo / purgatory for a long time now, and it's impactful on has potential impacts on our budget. And especially knowing that our lease is up at the end of October 2024, if we're thinking about a construction project that might ensue, which could be a 12 to 13 month window of time that would take. If we wanted something to happen before October 24, we would probably want to have made a decision by the end of September. So knowing that, being a little more proactive on this and moving this forward is something that would be helpful. I'm wondering what people think about having this be a priority item, number one, for the facilities committee, to do a deeper dive into these 2 to 3 options more closely and determine what else the board might need to know to make a decision, and then bring that recommendation to the board. I see some thumbs. Kevin, as the chair of that committee, do you have any opinion? Or Kathy, as a member of that committee?
I think
can't
that's a
see
great thing
if you're
for
just
us to
nodding, or
focus.
okay.
I think it's a great thing for
Awesome.
us to focus on.
Okay, great. All right, so we'll wait to hear back from you. Okay, the next item is for folks to sign up for monitoring reports. And for new members, this is how we ensure we are doing what we're supposed to be doing, and as a board, and all of our different policies. And so when you sign up for a report, you review the previous year's report, you write an update to it, and you submit it for the board to review, like we just did with Steve's tonight. And there are enough policies for every single person to sign up for one. And if you've never done it before, the person who did it before you can maybe help you to write it. And if they're not on the board, then I or Erin or another board member could help. There's lots of really good content that already exists. So you're not totally writing something new. What you are doing is looking back over the course of the year and thinking about what might have changed, and what you might recommend moving forward if there's anything that you think we could improve upon in our practice. So I just ask that everybody sign up for a report, whatever speaks to their heart the most, or they're the least averse to doing. And then just make sure you've done that by the retreat, so we can put it into our work plan.
So
And you can
Chris,
just reach out to me.
for a process, we just go into that document and put our name somewhere?
Correct. You should all have editing capabilities when you click on the link.
And you mean have our name in that document by the retreat, not have it written by the retreat?
Correct. So you will see the dates in the document. So Sarah, you signed up for accountability of the superintendent. That is not until December. So it shows you when it's due. So I'd suggest you put it on your calendar so Jennifer doesn't have to hound you. And yeah, so if you're an eager beaver, you can get yours done and out of the way in September. And if you really want to put it off and drag your feet, you can wait until June. First come, first serve. So yeah. Okay. Next we have updates from committees, and I don't know if we have any committee updates. I know for the Community Engagement Committee, I did not get a chance to submit my update. I don't know if there were any others. I don't think I saw any. They weren't attached to the agenda. So were there any updates from the other committees?
Can I just ask for clarification how I was like trying to do the minutes, but I didn't really know, was there a frame from our committee? Is there like a framework that you use to do the minute? Like that whole part of it was a little complicated.
Well, Jennifer sent out an email with templates. There should be templates in your
did?
folder. Yeah.
Oh, I missed that. And then so then was that person who did the minutes supposed to write the update probably?
Or at least
That's a
submit
great
the
question. I
minutes.
guess you can decide what you
Okay.
want to do.
Apologies to my group. That was my job.
I know at the Career Center, they actually attached the minutes of the committees to this meeting.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
As informational, similar to Patrick's report. And you review them on you review them at your leisure, and if there's some discussion about them, you bring it up at the meeting. At the full board meeting. And if you pick out something in one of those meeting minutes that you want to talk about at this meeting, you bring it up at this meeting. Or you wait till the next committee meeting and show up there.
And Steve, is that in lieu of a written update? I mean, that's essentially the update.
Yes, that's the update.
I think if that works for folks, that's great. I would just say that if you have anything you want to have the board discuss, that you call it out in some way. These are just, or it should be woven into the agenda as a discussion item.
Well, you could have the agenda item the way you have it now, and you could ask for comments, and those comments could come from the committee members if they wanted to point out something specific. If they wanted to highlight something.
Okay, so we'll keep figuring out the best way to do this since this is new to us, but I think that's a great suggestion.
A question about the minutes. Erin's not here that I see. I think
she's away.
I think she was going to do the minutes. I'm not sure how quickly we need to post those minutes.
So minutes for any official board meeting, as those are expected to be posted within 5 days, I believe.
Yeah, so we're probably all in arrears. But it's our first try, so.
Yep, I'm going to make a note that we're going to minutes posted within.
I will just add that facilities is not in the rears because we didn't have an official meeting. So.
Oh, well, you get half a gold star because it really doesn't count, but you know.
We'll take it. We'll take it.
All right.
Better than none.
That's right.
Connectivity
Chris.
issues.
Hey, Krista, just a matter of housekeeping. I noticed on the website that at least the Finance Committee charge has not been uploaded to the website.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, moving on to public comment, and I don't know if our visitor is still with us.
Yes.
Anyone? Okay, so we're opening public comment. And let's see, Lynn, go ahead if you'd like to speak.
I just wanted to let you guys know that Bentley has been through a tremendous amount of loss and things throughout his life, starting with his parents being taken away from his parents, being adopted by his grandparents, his grandmother dying, and his grandfather just now died. He has gone to Moncton School since kindergarten and has been with his peers all this time, and he has a very close bond with them. He does not make friends easily as far as other children, you know, outside of who he knows so much. And he had to move in with us because his grandfather has passed. And we live in Ferrisburg, and he would like to stay with his peers. His counselors and all that agree that would be the best thing for him. I'm just trying to keep him so he's doesn't fall through the cracks. He's just having a really hard time with adjusting to everything as it is now, and hopefully he won't have to adjust to a different school.
Thank you. And is there any other public comment? Okay, so we're going to move on to August meeting prep, where that's the retreat, and we have our work plan, which will have all of our other items on it. And I think we have plenty more to chew on. So I'm not sure we need to go into great detail about that. Is there anyone who can pull up the board evaluation and do that for us? It's a link right in the agenda, so you just need to click on it and ask the questions.
I got it up.
Great, thanks, Steve.
So what is the level of engagement of all board members? I'm going to say hi.
I see thumbs.
Yeah, and I'm not looking at the screen anymore. I'm looking at the thing. So was the
All
agenda
right.
followed? Was the agenda followed?
Yes.
Yes. Any comments on the agenda?
No.
Does the
No
chair
comment.
does the chair effectively establish the agenda and the materials for distribution to the board?
Yes.
Any comments on the agenda, on any other comments for the chair?
No.
No,
Does the
you had
chair-
to adjust to Zoom, and that was, you did a good job.
Thanks. A little clunky.
Is the chair effective in fostering a professional culture regarding fair and open deliberation, full participation of all members, and ensuring the integrity of the board process?
Yes.
Yes.
What went well with the meeting?
We had good discussions, and it went pretty according to time pretty well.
I'll concur.
Anything
It
else?
had the potential to be a long one.
What suggestions do you have for ways to improve future meetings? All right, well,
No.
That's a wrap, I think.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. And so Kathy Epgar made a motion to adjourn. Can I have a second?
I'll second, Sarah.
Sarah LaPearl, all those in favor of adjourning at 8:14.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I don't